bearing downwind.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Starlight, star bright, but it's an artificial star tonight. Our servants in the sky, this time on Inside Space.
This is the high bay at Hughes in El Segundo, California. Hi, I'm Jeff Fox. This time on Inside Space, we're going to take a look at what's going on behind me where they are building satellites. Now, if you think satellites solely is the province of government to use for the military or for research applications, you've missed about half the boat, because about 50% of what's built behind me is built for commercial purposes. In other words, people send them up into space to make money. And we'll take a tour and show you exactly how they're built in a couple of minutes. But as long as we're going to talk about satellites, we might as well talk about how many are flying over your head every day.
In 1957, the first man-made satellite, the Soviet Sputnik, launched into history. About the size of a beach ball, the 184-pound Sputnik carried a very simple radio beeper to announce its position to the world.
Until 2 days ago, that sound had never been heard on this earth.
But that was enough to grab the attention of the communications industry. Early Bird, the world's first commercial communications satellite, went up in 1965, paving the way for global communications as we know it. Just over 2 feet in diameter, Early Bird had a capacity of 1 black and white television station. Now, 30 years later, the business has matured. More than 2,000 satellites are orbiting the Earth, and about 160 of them are non-military communication satellites linking every part of the world. And satellites themselves have grown up. The 40-foot-tall Intelsat 6 can simultaneously carry 120,000 telephone conversations and 3 full-color television channels. Intelsat 6 can send a signal around the world in less than 1 second. The Galaxy-class satellites, first launched in 1983, bring dozens of TV channels to more than 20 million homes that can't be serviced by standard cable. Satellite people speak their own language. The satellites themselves are called birds, and the amount of information each can pass is called bandwidth. The bigger the bandwidth, the more information that can be transmitted to a dish. Bandwidths are continually growing, as dishes are correspondingly shrinking. With smaller Earth stations, people around the world can take advantage of satellites for their communications needs. Indonesians on 13,677 islands are connected by telephones thanks to the Palapa series. Australian communications bound across the continent and surrounding Pacific regions with help from AusSat. Mexico's Solidaridad keeps Mexican broadcasts and data transmissions up to the minute. Nowadays, satellite dishes are popping up in every corner of the world, not to mention your own backyard. So today, telephone calls, faxes, television programs, and countless other forms of communication can truly reach anyone, anywhere on the globe.
The wonderful part about being on the satellite link is that in the United States, marine creatures in their natural state, untouched by...
This hardware on the bench is going to be launched into space pretty soon. Big difference between this gear and gear that you may have at home, sensitive, high-tech things, is that you can't send a factory-trained technician up to space, which is why this becomes a very, very difficult structure to put together. This is Emery Wilson from Hughes Satellite and Communication. You have to think of things differently, don't you? Because service is a major problem once these are on station.
Essentially, we have to build this satellite to last 10 to 15 years without any service. And so that means it's got to work perfectly from the first day onward through the life of the satellite. Well, this is kind of the birth of a satellite right in here. This is where we have the basic structure, what we call the bus of a satellite. It's on this bus or basic structure that we will mount the communications electronics packages, the propulsion section, the thrusters, and all of that which make up a communications satellite.
Now, in space, it's not a big deal how much it weighs, but I assume that to get it up to space, weight is really of primary importance, right?
It's very critical because our customers essentially pay for the weight. It's just like sending a package across country. You pay for the weight and the size of that package.
Where are we heading now?
Well, we're going to the payload integration area, which is where we actually put the communications electronics onto the spacecraft.
So what's in this jig now is a satellite actually being put together?
Being built up, right. And you're just seeing some of the early development here, some of the tubes that are just now going on.
With the electronics this complicated and sophisticated systems, how do you really know before it goes on the top of the rocket that everything is going to work? Because again, once it gets into space, it's too late.
That's right, and it's too far away for repairmen to reach at 22,300 miles above the Earth. So what we have to do here at Hughes is we have to test the satellite at every level, at the unit and component level, up to the subsystem level, and the complete satellite is tested. There are countries all over the world that are represented here in this room, and so each satellite is essentially handmade.
Are we running out of room up there? I mean, aren't the parking spots getting full by now?
Well, in actuality, we are beginning to have that problem, and that was one of the reasons that, some years ago, 10, 12 years ago now, I guess, that the satellites began to change frequencies. As part of the communications system that we would put up for a customer, it would include normally 2 satellites, one primary, one backup, and a master control station on the ground to control the satellite throughout its life.
And then someone will have to stay there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
That's right. The satellites are being moved by the solar wind from the sun. There's a slight pressure of ions that push against the satellite, which we call the solar wind. That moves the satellite a little bit, and so every once in a while we have to use the thrusters on board the satellite to put the satellite back into position so that it will always continually look at the Earth and at a certain area on the Earth.
We're at a much farther level here. This is final assembly now?
Yeah, this is our satellite assembly area, or what we call the high bay. This is where the satellites begin to come together and look like satellites.
From here, the next step is to go to the launch facility?
Well, there are a few things missing off of this particular satellite at this stage. There would be solar panels on each side. There would be thermal blanket material covering all of this area in here where you see the electronics. And there would also be the reflectors that would be positioned out from the spacecraft once it's in orbit.
There's a sign here. This means something explosive is on board?
That's right. For those solar panels, they are deployed using a spring-type mechanism that is built into the solar panel that allows it to open up. To allow it to open, we have some tiny little explosive devices on board called squibs. And when those are fired, it releases that solar panel from the body of the spacecraft and allows it to deploy out. This is a solar panel here, and of course the solar panel is used to convert the sun's rays into electricity, which is used to power the satellite. There are small solar cells placed on this panel, and you can see the panel is made out of an aluminum honeycomb. And then above here you can see a full-scale model of a satellite as it would appear in space, with the reflectors deployed and the solar panels out to each side.
Direct from the satellite right to your house when Inside Space comes back.
4, 3, 2, 1.
You may have a satellite dish at home, or maybe you have friends who have a satellite dish, and you know that they can be immense, huge. In fact, some communities have taken to banning satellite dishes because, quite honestly, they're pretty ugly. I know I live in a community that has banned satellite dishes. But this satellite over here is going to change all that. This is a DBS, direct broadcast satellite. And the technology on board says dishes can be smaller and satellites can transmit to a whole lot more places.
Television addicts, beware! There are now 150 channels from which to choose. You can be the ultimate couch potato and never leave the house, not even to pay your cable bill, because the era of large-scale direct satellite broadcasting is here.
You're about to enter a new era in television.
DirecTV is the offspring of technology giants Hughes, Thomson RCA, and Sony. The system offers a remarkable array of personalized viewing choices any time of the day or night. You're probably watching Inside Space the old-fashioned way via analog waves, the medium of vinyl records and AM radio. And like any analog medium, the signal is subject to interference. DirecTV is different. Pictures are crisp and flawless with CD-quality sound. And there are plenty of channels.
It is digital, and it uses compressed digital technology, which allows for each transponder up to 5 or 6 different channels, which prior to digital technology, there could have only been 1, or in some cases 2.
It works this way. Using sophisticated broadcast automation, programming is collected at the heart of the system in Castle Rock, Colorado. Here, the compression schemes are used to combine different sources into tight packets of signals. And these are cast 22,300 miles into space, where 2 satellites launched by European Space Agency Ariane rockets have been waiting. The programming is relayed to any home with a DirecTV-capable dish antenna. Because the microwave signals are so incredibly strong, the dish is small and can be installed practically anywhere.
The size of the dish, it's a DBS, it's high-powered satellite. It's the first high-powered satellite to the consumer in the U.S.
Until now, satellite dishes were much larger. You needed the big dish area to compensate for old analog's weaknesses. DirecTV's digital programming gets instantly transformed into precise reception by computer circuitry in your home receiver. A credit card-sized access card containing a microchip initiates programming, stores purchasing data for pay-per-view channels, and provides system security. An on-screen guide displays the plethora of channels and programs, and because there are so many available channels, DirecTV often time shifts important shows, so if you miss a movie, it'll be on again in 30 minutes. The options are vast with series, specials, informational programming, and motion pictures. And what about the interactive future? Well, DirecTV's multiple channel encoding might let broadcasters send you different program outcomes on different channels. But with so many non-interactive options to choose from, will viewers really want to shape their own shows?
Up next, how space makes sense and dollars for some companies. Don't go away, we're coming right back.
4, 3, 2, 1.
We're back from Hughes in El Segundo, and up here is a vacuum chamber. You know, when you launch a satellite, it goes into the void of space. It gets subjected to lots of heat and obviously no atmospheric pressure, no oxygen. So they can simulate just about all of that in this chamber over here. Now, when people started launching objects into space, everybody thought it was going to be a major gold rush. As it has turned out, the only place there's been a lot of profit has been in communications. And you don't have to be an Einstein to figure out why.
It's all relative.
Okay, genius, you've decided you want to be a nice boy and send a pound cake to your grandmother, who happens to live on the space station. So how much do you think you'll have to pay? Well, depending on who you ask, it'll cost anywhere from $500 million to almost $1 billion to launch and recover the space shuttle. And on a good day, that shuttle can carry about 50,000 pounds of payload into orbit. So, in nice round numbers, it'll cost you about $10,000 to ship Granny her goodies. Now, just imagine buying a ticket to deliver it in person. Expendable launch vehicles are really only a little cheaper, about $4,000 per pound to the same orbit. How come space is so pricey? Well, let's say you wanted to fly from Washington to San Francisco. Imagine how much your ticket would cost if you had to travel on a vehicle which you could use only once, because important pieces of it would keep falling off as you went. Expensive pieces like the engines, fuel tanks, and steering system, so that by the time you got to San Francisco, you'd be left with just the passenger cabin. And that's the situation we have now with expendable rockets. You have to launch them over the ocean or over barren territory to avoid dropping the used-up pieces on people's heads. But what if you could make rockets like airplanes?
It takes the same fuel to put a pound in orbit as it does to fly it from here to Sydney, Australia. And airlines operate at like 3 to 5 times fuel costs. There is no reason why spaceships should operate at much more than about 3 to 5 times fuel costs. which means that you ought to be able to buy a ticket to orbit for about the same price as a first-class ticket from here to Australia.
It doesn't have to look like an airplane. It just has to operate like one. That's the way to cut the cost per pound to orbit. Right now, the only things which make any money in space are communication satellites. And you don't have to be an Einstein to figure out why. It's because radio waves are weightless. Just get the satellite up to orbit and your freight bill is paid. There are lots of other things we'd like to do in space, but until the price of a ride into orbit comes down, any industry which weighs much of anything can't be profitable. And therefore, my little Einsteins, if you want to be the prospector that starts the next space gold rush, you better start thinking about things which cost a lot, but weigh very little.
So this ends up being one of those amazing times when the laws of physics and the laws of economics actually mesh. In other words, build it smaller, lighter, cheaper, and you'll make more money with it.
If you take a look around you in geosynchronous orbit, you might think that the vast expanse of space could never fill up. But with communication satellites spreading like dandelions on a windy day, a little orbital elbow room could be hard to find, unless you happen to be on a little island in the South Pacific, and I'll explain. In July of 1994, the APT Satellite Company of Hong Kong used a Chinese Long March rocket to launch its first communication satellite. Called APSTAR-1, the Hughes-built satellite has 24 C-band transponders and 8 Ku-band transponders. Well, before the launch, officials at APT were deluged with requests for regional capacity, so much so that APSTAR-1 alone couldn't hope to fill everyone's needs. Enter APSTAR-2, a more powerful Hughes creation equipped with 26 C-band transponders. In fact, APSTAR-2's footprint can reach all the way from Southeast Asia to Russia. APT's second communication satellite is slated to launch in late January. These and other satellites could help open an Asian TV and communications market of over 2 billion people. But all was not rosy with the launch of APSTAR-1. When Japan learned of where APT intended to place the satellite, the protest could be heard around the world. Now, the International Telecommunications Union requires that satellites headed for geosynchronous orbit be placed 2 degrees apart. And Japan had parked its Sakura 3A communication satellite at 132 degrees east, while the American-run RIMSAT-1 orbited at 130 degrees. But that July, APSTAR-1 found itself at 131 degrees east, slipping in just 1 degree away from RIMSAT and Sakura. Well, Japanese officials immediately protested that APSTAR-1's transmissions might interfere with Sakura's, a problem that would affect millions of people. And so, negotiations went on for several months. One compromise might have been to have both satellites transmit their signals at lower power levels to prevent interference. But in September, the Chinese came up with an even more amenable answer, an answer which lay 7 degrees and several thousand miles farther east. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, not really far from the island of Fiji, lies the tiny island kingdom of Tonga. APT's solution was to lease Tonga's orbital slot and move APSTAR-1 to 138 degrees east. Right now, APSTAR-1 is functioning perfectly in its new home above the Earth. In this case, the scrimmage for orbital airspace has a happy ending. But with global communications ballooning the way it is, satellite parking spaces may become harder and harder to find.
Now, coming up next on Inside Space, talking to the world. So don't go away.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Above all, 1962 was a year of spectacular space achievements. Overnight, Colonel John H. Glenn was a national hero when he became the first American to orbit the Earth. The climax of 3 years of effort, his flight spurred new efforts to beat the Russians to the moon. A new era in worldwide communications was opened with the orbiting of Telstar, a satellite carrying complex electronic equipment. Once in orbit, Telstar picks up a signal from Earth, magnifies it 10 billion times, and relays it to a receiving station. Pictures that were broadcast from the U.S. to Europe and back at remarkable clarity.
We're back from the high bay. If you're looking for me, I'm over here. You know, it's funny how these things work out. 40 years ago, we had no satellites, and now you really can't live without them. In fact, this program is coming to you via satellite right now. It has become such a little deal, we don't even bother to mention it. If you'd like to get in touch with us at Inside Space, here's how. You can pick up pen and paper and write Inside Space, USA Network Sci-Fi Channel, 1230 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020. Or if you're on the internet, it's maxsfc at AOL.com. By the way, my thanks to the folks here at Hughes who've shown us a great time today. They wouldn't let us play with their toys, but they let us get pretty close and showed us a lot of things that I certainly had never seen before. The funny thing is, this started as a small aircraft company, well, a small company owned by a larger-than-life character, Howard Hughes. Now it's the world's largest producer of commercial satellites, which is something to shoot for. I'm Jeff Fox. I'll see you next time, Inside Space.
And that will also physically remove them from interference with other satellites at synchronous orbit, which is 22,300 miles above the Earth.
Of course, if something is in a low Earth orbit, then it's only visible for 15 or 20 minutes at a time, right?
That's right. And so you would have to have what you might call a swarm of satellites, like a swarm of bees. You would have to have many satellites going over an area at a certain time so that when one satellite passes out of view, another satellite is coming in to replace it.
There are old test pilots and there are bold test pilots, but there are no old, bold test pilots. In other words, the days of the goggles and the silk scarf and going straight down like Clark Gable are gone. I mean, there's a sense of discipline there that has to be a part of a successful pilot. And that seems to me is the one characteristic all of us had in common.